Okay, so it's 5 p.m. I guess, well, okay, once Johanna is ready, I can, okay, great. I'll have just some boring introductions first to tell you why are we doing this, very short and very important information. Usually we drag a little bit longer, the discussions, because they're very interesting, but today it will be 60 minutes precisely. So why are we here? So this webinar is organized as part of the Trust in Play project, which is a project funded by Creative Europe, and it's led by Goethe Institute in Athens. And so we're creating a European School of Urban Game Designers. This is not a school yet, but more like an experimental way and a road towards creating one. So the school consists of 3 branches. One of them is based in Amsterdam, and it's led by the Amsterdam University of Applied Science. Then we have the branch in Athens, led by Innovathens. And the third branch is run by Edge Riders, and it's a nomadic branch for which I'm working as a community manager. Today our webinar is about safety and consent in games, and it will be led by Johanna, Koljonen and Aron, Birtalan. And one more thing that I wanted to say before we start is that we're already preparing sessions for our training week in Athens, and if some of you who are coming are here with us, then check out the trustinplay.edgeriders.eu community and leave maybe some ideas about unconference program and things that you would like to lead yourself during the program. Okay, and now I can leave the floor to our wonderful speakers today. So Aron and Johanna. Maybe one more thing. Okay, that's actually really important. So if you want to ask any questions, we have a chat window on the right. Just write the questions at any time during the conversation. Matteo will be looking at the screen and picking the questions and forwarding them to the speakers. Okay, now I think we can start.
Okay. Aron, would you unmute yourself as well? Yeah.
Yes. Hey, hi. Hello, everybody. Hi. Thank you, Natalia, for putting this up. I'm terribly excited about this. Also, I think it's been a while since the two of us also talked. So this is like a nice ways to meet again. I was supposed to be in Malmö, but I think this can work just as well. How should we go about this? Do you wanna do a short like introduction of us, or like who we are, where we come from? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit about your story. How did you end up working with games, and then let's move straight to the conversation about your area of expertise.
Aron, do you want to start?
Sure. So my name is Aron Birtalan. I'm originally from Budapest, Hungary, currently living in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. I don't know if any of you are there right now. It's a classic Amsterdam weather, really cranking up the rain to 11. My background is in multiple things, but I think what's interesting for today, and this is kind of what I also brought for the conversation, is both. I'm mostly working as an artist. I work with play a lot, and I have a background in role playing of my native Hungary. And this is a kind of role playing that's sort of similar to live action role playing, but it comes from a different background, not from what we know from the 70s on. Of course, that traces back even then. That didn't pop out of nothing either. But it's more something that's close to different kind of streams of critical pedagogy that was floating around in the first half of the 20th century. And I currently position my practice somewhere between arts and different forms of pedagogy. So I make games and game-like experiences and unusual gatherings, as I like to call them sometimes. And I also teach and give workshops to kids and adults. With kids also, I run a quite long summer camp for them. I think what I was bringing today that can be an interesting complement to, because I think Johanna and I, we share a lot of mutual passions towards role-playing. What I thought of bringing today was more perspective that was more towards some of the things that I do with kids, but also some of my experiences working as an artist in different kind of artistic disciplines, and how safety and consent in play kind of pans out with the arts, which is a quite often controversial, but definitely interesting topic to explore.
Yeah, I'm already making notes, so that's probably a good sign. Yeah, my name is Johanna, and I immediately became a little bit stressed when you said how we should talk about how we ended up in games, because by many definitions of games, Aron and I are not working with games, and that's, I think, actually quite relevant today. I think that's probably why we are sitting here having this conversation. And then I thought about it, and I was like, should I apologize? Like, no, because I mean, on the other hand, I'm also going tomorrow to visit the AAA company, video games company, for instance, to talk to them about exactly these kinds of things. So in some sense, we do consult. We, as in my company, also consult with people who make games in a very traditional sense. I'm the CEO of a very small consultancy called Participation Design Agency, and that's a pun. It's a double pun, actually, the name, but one of the puns is that's the three things. Yes, we're an agency, but that is the three things that we do. We make participation. Everything that we do, any kind of problem that you're asking us to solve is going to be resolved through a design process. An agency is the quality that we design for. We make sure that our participants have the agency to do things. And to us, as I'm sure we're going to return to during this hour, that's about, is it possible within the frame, the interaction frames of the piece of your game, what is it possible for the participants to do, and what are they intended to do? Maybe in that order. What are they intended to do? What is it possible for them to do? And do they want to do the thing? And that's, in traditional game design, that's a question very much about like incentives and punishments, for instance. So like what incentives and costs and resources. I want to do a thing, it's going to cost me these resources, so my incentives are these, it gives me better odds to do another thing, or it fulfills a quest, or it works towards a goal, or something like that. But when we work with humans in rooms, and especially in games that are not competitive by nature, which the kinds of live role-playing games that we make are not competitive. They're fundamentally collaborative, even though inside the stories there might be conflicts and tensions and competition. Then it's very much becomes a question of normal social dynamics, which is, what is the social cost of doing a thing? Like, will it be embarrassing? Will somebody laugh at me? What is the risk of failure? What is my potential for succeeding? Can I challenge myself in interesting ways if I do things? And these also become aspects of safety suddenly. And when it comes to consent here, it's just as much, it's just as important. And I think that's why we who work on the sort of edges of these different disciplines end up having a lot of answers. So my company makes live role-playing games for grown-ups in a style that is called Nordic LARP, which is fundamentally collaborative. And we make our own original work directly for players who just buy tickets from us and come to our experiences. But we also make commercial work with commercial IPs, and then they can be more or less LARPy depending on the bravery of the customer, basically. And then in addition to that, we also do experience design and participation design with cultural institutions, ranging from like the Kennedy Center to like small Danish municipalities. So very, very different things. But one thing that I've been doing a lot in the last year is teaching immersive designers of different kinds, people who make VR, and in particular people who make immersive theater, about consent design in live role-playing games. And it's difficult because within, for instance, the stage world, people who come to immersive theater typically come from either dance or theater. And they come from an ideological tradition where they make a piece. I make art now, and I give the art to the audience, which should be grateful to be in receipt of my art. Or perhaps maybe they come from performing art. And in performance, of course, we have an expectation. The qualified contemporary art audience knows that if I go to a performance at a gallery, for instance, I will probably be pushed. I go there to be challenged. Now, if I go on a date to a nice experience with my partner, then I probably don't expect to be pushed and challenged. And if I go to the theater, I expect to be sitting in a chair. And if I go to the immersive theater, I expect to maybe get to participate a little, but I don't expect anyone to humiliate me, for instance. In a gallery, a gallery audience might expect that if I go to see some really cutting edge performance, maybe somebody will humiliate me. But if you mix audiences from different groups, which automatically you will do if you make new art forms or new types of games, people will come in with very different expectations. Some of them will expect to be humiliated in short, and some of them will definitely not expect to be humiliated. And how do you make a piece where everybody can understand what they're participating in, consent to what they're, imagine what is even possible for them to do and to happen to them, and consent to that, and also feel brave, safe. First, safe, you have to be safe from harm. And then when you feel safe, you can be brave and you can participate in the experience as intended or as you are sort of developing it. And different traditions have such different ideologies around this. Game designers, game designers tend to trust that the game mechanics will handle this for you. I don't know, man. Like I'm with AAA companies, I'm talking with the video games industry a lot, and I'm saying, well, if your player communities are really behaving in disgusting ways towards each other as they play, then you haven't designed that space. And it's a mind-blowing idea to them that you can design a culture for your players. And to me, it's so obvious. So, I guess these are some of I've sketched out at great length now, some of these fields. What are you thinking, Aron?
I think just kind of connect to the last thing that you said. Of course, this is I'm still getting my head wrapped around the idea of like game and play, because I hate to use the word problematic, because I think it's like the word interesting. It doesn't really mean anything, but like in some sense it is difficult that in English you have these two, or maybe it actually helps that you game and play are in different ways. I think a lot of like in Germanic languages and in my native Hungarian, the word game and play and toy are kind of from the same root. But like one of the things that I'm thinking about is that with this kind of that the game structure will handle it. I think it comes from this kind of assumption that engaging with a game structure equals playing. Which is not true at all. Like I think playing has a lot more to do than interacting with a game structure, and you can play even outside of a game structure. I think playing is a very certain way of being and becoming, and it's kind of hard to describe what playing is. I think it's easier to describe what playing is not, but the moment that you're in it, you know it, that is happening to you. But
and others will know it too, which is quite important. There's like we're very good at reading other people's behavior as playful, even in like a professional situation or something. We can see when people are being playful or jokey, or having those kinds of like so it helps us to for instance analyze the threat level in a situation.
If I can add something or maybe ask something from your experience, when you design new kinds of pieces, how do you install certain safeguards, and how do you guide people you consult in order to ensure that like the basic safety measures are in place, let's say, when we do something new? And also, what happens when you have new kinds of experience audiences coming in? How do you like create different thresholds, let's say, for different participants to feel engaged, but to an extent that they would be willing to be engaged?
And that's like an 8-hour question just there. Like so, but I guess it's important to just state that there's a fundamental like physical safety requirements if you make events or products that are typically encoded in law in your country. And I find that people are surprisingly bad. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I want to make events, but they don't know anything about like fire safety regulations. So actually it's a good idea to see like, okay, what kind of permits do you need, and what kinds of like safety requirements are there on you? And then on top of that, that's like the legal baseline. Just the normal sanity baseline is like, how do we make sure? And sometimes when we teach, we show the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's not a perfect tool in any way, but it's if you think about it just as a checklist, it's like, okay, I want my participants to be doing things that are on the highest level of like human performance. They need to be on the top level of Maslow's hierarchy. They need to be relaxed and fulfilled and feel safe and creative and be able to do all of those things, that's the kind of value we're looking for. So if they're very hungry, very tired, cold, uncomfortable, they need to go to the bathroom, they're not going to be in a flow state engaging with your thing. So you need to get all of that in place first. But also sometimes it's about the kinds of things, like one of the most important safety and comfort and consent design tools is about selecting your participants. And that, of course, most of the time you don't actively select individuals. So you're trying to communicate what is the kind of experience that we're offering here, what kinds of things will happen. Sometimes, depending on the thing, you can have like an ingredient list. These are the kinds of physical actions that are going to be happening. These are the kinds of themes that we're going to engage with. And those are so embedded into the piece that if you can't walk upstairs, you probably can't participate in this. Or if you cannot engage even in a passive way with themes of, let's say, sexual violence or incest, for instance, which a lot of people can't for really good reasons, well, then this piece is not for you. Then you need to help people already to not show up to a thing that is impossible for them for reasons. But that reason could also be an allergy. It doesn't have to be trauma. But so then that needs to be in place. But then once the participants are there, show up on site. Like once you have a group of humans in a room or in a space or at a festival, whatever, it can be very big. Some of the games that we make are 10,000 people playing at a rock festival at the same time. So then you have a community of players. And then that's where the interesting things begin. And it's about you give them explicit rules, you model behaviors implicitly as well, and you try to help them to create things. I think Aron might actually have better examples of this, because your pieces are relatively contained and often in like few spaces and with smaller groups. So how would you start approaching that?
I think I mean echoing a lot of the things that you said. I took a lot of like loose notes that I'm just going to throw at as an answer, because I think it kind of came up with a lot of things. I think it really if we talk about like how to make this kind of thing, I can't stress enough how important transparency is towards your potential players, but also towards yourself. I think that's often very much underestimated, especially. Well, this is what I really commonly found when talking with artists, for example, who go into play experiences, and in mostly in a lot of fields where people go from an already established form of something into creating something new. What I feel a lot about that, for example, and this is why I think a lot of artworks fall short that include game elements to it, that or want to have play, that a lot of the art experiences is layers of who gets to do what is pretty fixed, and we have thousands of years of history and subliminal conditioning for that, and institutes that are designed in a certain way and lit in a certain way and choreographies in a certain way. Now you put a play situation in it and you suddenly expect the whole thing to be toppled over just because you announce that it's a game going on. Not going to happen. And this is something very difficult always to see, that within each situation that you introduce, you need to make a new contract basically every time. You need to treat the players in a play situation as consenting adults who you together with make a contract, who you all agree on. And that's why the transparency goes back to, you need to be transparent with what contract are you putting forward to the players, but you also need to be aware towards yourself what existing contracts are in place already. So if you make something in a theater, know that 99% of the time they will look at you as a performer or a director. So be aware of that. Like, how do you undo that? Same for a gallery space. Same for any kind of event when you put on a pedestal. How do you change that around? But it's also good to know, like, what is the economy of these kind of situations? Like, if you have 20 minutes, how much of an authorship and authority can you undo versus thousands of years of conditioning of treating you in a certain way? I felt that a lot of times in situations, if I would run a game, even in going back to safety, and this is such a weird situation that even as your maker, as a facilitator, they will look for you for a lot of safety advices. I think I usually say that if I run a game and someone would have a cardiac arrest, even though I would run the game to 20 heart surgeons, they would turn towards me in the first instance. And which is just very telling of, like, this hypothetical situation is very telling of, like, how different things can go. And I do think, so maybe two more comments really quickly of what you said. I think the human needs pyramid is very much underestimated, and within that, the playing really sits on the top of it, but the wiggle room in that is huge. So that should not be underestimated. I think a lot of makers think that it should travel on the whole spectrum to be challenging and transformative, and that we need to play with really with all aspects of, I don't know, what a human can do. Not necessarily. Within that tiny frame, a lot of things can happen. Yeah, I had maybe one more thing.
I could just throw in a little
please.
tiny comment there, which is that there are some things that people who get into like these types of game design, everybody kind of goes on a journey where they think the same things are interesting. Everyone's like, oh my God, physical discomfort, that is going to be so interesting. And I can tell you, like, it's slightly interesting, but it gets uninteresting very fast because of this you know, especially if you want to engage with some kind of fictional frame, it's very difficult because the physical discomfort is just going to overrule it. Social discomfort, again, like it's a very difficult balance to do, but of course people are going to have powerful experiences from like, but you know, then you don't have to go to a game experience. You can just go to like a survival camp or like take a fitness class or something, or I don't know, volunteer, do poetry slam. Like if you want to have the experience of, as a participant, of challenging yourself and doing something difficult and surviving and feeling stronger for it, there are a lot of places where you can do that. And I don't think that those tools necessarily bring very much to game design, even though a lot of people are like, oh, that's cool. And then like, surprises, that's very cool. And in theater, in a lot of disciplines, also the arts, uncertainty is interesting. Like in contemporary art, typically not understanding what's going on is a big part of the enjoyment, and like engaging with something where you don't understand how it's going on is great. That's not a great quality for participatory art, however, because if I get the kind of uncertain where I don't know what I'm supposed to do, then I just shut down and feel like an idiot, and then I'm not co-creating. So if I'm just meant to like walk around a space and engage in a sort of passive but physically moving way, okay, fine, like then that might be interesting. But if you want me to contribute something new and to be a little bit brave and to employ my creativity to complete the piece, which most of us who are making games in some ways are doing, then it's quite important that I understand what's going on. And then that's not aesthetically interesting until you reach a space where, like inside the fiction, for instance, or within a specific frame, then uncertainty can be wildly interesting, as long as I understand what I'm supposed to be doing. And a lot of people, when they're new to this, they find that they don't see the distinction between those two levels.
I think a lot comes with this kind of mind shift that, or at least this is how I always felt, that I started to be engaged with experiences the moment I stopped to feel that I'm performing someone's work, and that turned into I'm creating an experience here, either for myself or to be for the people around me. So my whole action stopped to be externalized into kind of validate and put myself into someone's frame, and it really came from like an internal, either individual or collective motivation.
Yeah.
But that took a while, and that takes a while to kind of reframe these kind of things.
We talk about the first person audience, so that like the audience position in this kind of work is like inside the individual body of each participant, which is really powerful, because it means that the like ultimately the things one of the canvases, my interface to the piece is my body to begin with. And also that means that the canvas in many ways is my own emotional reactions and my physical reactions. And that means that boredom can be aesthetically interesting, you know, within reason, and discomfort, like a small discomfort, great stimulation, great way to simulate big discomfort, for instance. But a lot of the time, you know, the brain is still there. It's going to fill in the things. And if you're thinking, and for most people who are creative, if they come from another discipline where they have been trained that I am the artist, and my goal, the goal of art is to express myself to other people so that they can receive. It's very difficult mind shift as a maker creator of work to say, okay, my participants are going to be the audience, and I will never experience what they experience. I will never have access to their journey through my piece. And also I'm giving them a little or quite a lot of control of what the piece is. And it's not for everybody. Like if this is terrifying to you, you should explore it. But if it feels like it's not for you, then maybe you should write a novel or make a movie or be in some other medium, like, which are also great.
Yeah, I do think that comes from that brings about a very. I'm thinking that this can be a very interesting thing for general game design also, and how to think about this, and how to think about the question of document and documentation. Actually, that I think in these kind of situation, in what Johanna referred to as a first person audience, as she referred to it, that the artwork, let's put it this way, or what happens is not how it looks, something looks from the outside, and that's generally for play, but how does it feel to be within? Meaning that the experience is the artwork, or the thing is the experience. Now, how do you then translate that? Because people having a great time or a horrible time might look exactly the same from the outside. That's especially true in Northern and Western Europe now that I've been living here for a while. But also their testimonials afterwards do not give an account of the experience. So this is another complete one, because with an experience you might actually come to different realizations, months or years later. So this is a big discussion in general, I think, in role playing and in art and participating. What is the document? I would go on the limb where I am now. I'm thinking that the participant is the document, either an individual and a community. So the document of play, actually, in general, is the rearranged network between people and thoughts and objects. And this is why actually play is a political practice also.
No, I agree. But of course, that's very difficult to slot into almost any kind of economic structure. Like that's very difficult in the art world where you need to sell a work. And I mean, when we have artists like Brody Condon, for instance, who does make LARPs, he also makes video documentation of the LARPs, and those are two completely separate artworks. He makes a LARP, which is a separate artwork, and then he video documents it and creates an art film that is based on the visual, like using the visual surface generated by the LARP, but that piece doesn't tell you anything about what the LARP was like. And that's one way of doing it. And then, then you can show that in galleries or make editions or have these kinds of things. But it's also, the business model, if you want to do this commercially, it's very difficult because it doesn't scale. And it's easy to go towards relatively shallow, like it's easy to give people like a pretty good experience that doesn't challenge them at all. And that's the risk, I think, in the commercial space with these kinds of experiences. Yeah. I'd like to say, I see the chat is now orange, so we probably have a question. But before I look at that, I would like to say two things about experience design, just to illustrate what kinds of things we're talking about, because it might sound very abstract. And I think the important thing here is that designing human culture and human behavior is really easy because we do it all the time. Like we are all experts in this. We are expert users of social and physical environments. So if we stop and think about this, we all understand how this works. And I will give two examples. One is if you were to organize a party in your home and you wanted people to dance perhaps and to talk. When you design any kind of experience, it's good to start by thinking, what are the verbs? Like what kinds of activities do I want people to do? I want them to dance, I want them to talk, I want them perhaps to talk to strangers, I want them to kiss or whatever. And then you think, what do I need? Okay, if I want them to dance, I will need a room which has music that is pretty loud and lights that are relatively low so that people won't feel embarrassed to dance. But then that room, that's not where conversation can happen, because either it's too quiet for the dancing or too loud. And then maybe you want in the kitchen, you always end up with very good conversation. And that has to do with the fact that most kitchens have a physical layout where you are at an optimal distance of less than 1.5 meters to everybody, so you can talk, and the light is good so you can see each other's faces, and you have something to do with your hands so you're not embarrassed. But I mean, I think if you've ever been to a party where you didn't have fun and it was awkward and embarrassing, if you stop and think about like, why is this embarrassing? What is wrong in this room? What could I change in this room to make this party more fun? Sometimes I go to dinner parties at friends' house, just having dinner, and there's no music in the background. And it means that if there's a lull in the conversation, it becomes awkward. Whereas if there's soft music, which you never think about until it's quiet, that it carries over the lull. So the changes in the physical environment translate to behavior changes in a way that is completely automatic. And we use this all the time in urban planning and in advertising and in designing venues and so on. And of course, if you make something with humans, you should do the same thing. Then Aron was also talking about this contract, and that's a more nuanced thing. But I would give this example. Let's think again that we're at a dinner party. So different cultures have different social rules. And if you make things for international participants or something that will happen in many countries, it's very important to keep this in mind and to be aware of it in a pretty nuanced way. So in a lot of countries, for instance, it's not okay. It's not socially acceptable to talk about politics at dinner. And then there are places, specific friend groups in those countries or in other countries where it is definitely acceptable to talk about. Like potentially one of the things that we can talk about at dinner is politics, right? But even in places where hypothetically it's always potentially okay to talk about politics, sometimes you would decide, you go to dinner, your baseline expectation is, I am at a dinner, therefore we perhaps will be talking about politics. Sometimes depending on, and that would be like your culture, your wider culture. But when you show up with the people in the room, there are reasons why you may decide on that specific day with the specific people in the room that it's now not okay to talk about politics. Maybe someone in the room just lost an election, or maybe somebody in the room is a person of color and racists just won an election, and talking about politics will remind them of the fact that they are being alienated and ostracized in their own country, for instance. And then everybody would understand, either explicitly or implicitly, that maybe today is not a good day to talk about politics, and then the collective can make the decision that today the contract will be that we will not talk about politics, right? So often when we're talking about like what kinds of topics are suitable for role playing, for instance, every topic is potentially theoretically suitable for role playing, but you have to put whatever your work is trying to do in context of the culture, of the wider culture, of the culture of the specific people who would potentially be coming, so to speak, to dinner at your house, but also give the people in the room, you know, a chance to decide on, because based on their like day-to-day shape, is today a day that I can deal with this or not. And if they didn't know that there might be politics, so to speak, or, you know, maybe if somebody shows up and says, I'd love to come to dinner, but given the outcome of this election, I can only come to dinner if we don't talk about politics, then we can say today that is the contract. And the fact that we are able to do this in a normal social situation also means, I think, that we're able to do it for all of our work. And I think there's this idea that you should always be allowed, that this becomes confused with freedom of speech. Like, no, like, of course you can make art about anything, but it's not smart to make art or games about everything in every situation, on every day, to every person. Like, it also matters who they are and what they bring into the room and what they're able to bring, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think following on that, I think a lot of the difficulties come from that. Even if you say that you make it for everything, you actually cannot make anything for everything. So if you say that anyone can join, and you really say that, sooner or later you will find that someone shows up to your experience and it's not he or she or they are not able to join, which is a pretty terrible experience.
Or they shouldn't be there, you know, they're able to join, but then that will be at the expense of everybody else. That's also a possibility.
Yeah. I had this story. My partner was telling this the other day. It just really sticks with me. So I was thinking of telling this, that she was going with her friend who's physically disabled. She uses a wheelchair, and they were going together to a theater show. And it turned out that one of the performers there, she had a participatory piece, which anyone could enjoy as long as you could walk around in a room. And so her friend couldn't join, and they kind of stuck together throughout that time. And I was thinking that this is one of the ways in which, if you design actually for participation, this is something that you should be very clear for. If it's your own event, for example, to invite people, to let them know what is actually the physical accessibility on it. And so people should not at least opt in or not opt in and opt out, but like hard negotiation is very problematic to happen on spot. And times, like, it's radical design changes are hard to happen on spot, and people don't like to feel that, you know, they want to join something but they can't because of something that they didn't know about.
That they weren't told about. And it is like, even for people who themselves have a disability, it's very difficult to be able to think about everything. And this is one of those things where it's actually a really smart idea to pay somebody to sanity check your piece on this, because there are people who are experts in this, and often they have disabilities, and they should absolutely be paid for their work. I think it's the ideal, the goal should be, if you want to make something for everybody, that it's also accessible for every type of person. But you will find very rapidly, if you think about this in a practical way, that it's not. Like, if you make it more accessible for some people, it's going to make it less accessible for some other people, which is different also from enjoyable, because that can also go different ways. But for instance, if you can make certain choices about light and sound to make it easier for people with social anxiety to be in a room, but that might work. That would make it harder for people with visual impairments or who are hard of hearing to navigate the space. You can make and there are many things, like it's not people, we are pretty good at thinking about the wheelchairs now. I think we're not very good at thinking about limited vision or people who see poorly in the dark, which we love making experiences where the light is very low and so on. So I think it's useful to think about that. But when I think it's also it's good for just like ethical reasons to consider accessibility, but it also makes you a better designer, because it reminds you that everything is a designable surface. Everything in your piece, including everything about the physical environment, are things where you can make active choices. And when it becomes available to you, or it becomes pointed out to you, like, okay, that this could be in another way as well, it makes you better at solving those hard problems if they occur on site, because you've never predict everything. But also it makes you a better designer for everybody, I think. And generally speaking, like the cliche is, if it's accessible for more people, it's going to be better for everybody. It's going to be easier to participate in for most people. So that's also true. There's a question. The question in the chat is, I heard about the concept of onboarding a lot in Nordic LARP. Can you explain how you usually do it? Yeah. Yes. So, and then there's like a companion question, which is about the debrief. Okay. So it's funny, in Nordic LARP, or LARP generally, any kind of role-playing game design even, we spent so much time, decades, figuring out what happens during the runtime. So the runtime would be, like, broadly speaking, when characters are being played. Maybe not every second. You can play around the table and sometimes you speak as yourself and sometimes as the character, or you play along LARP, sometimes you step out of the character. But broadly speaking, that's during the runtime of the piece. And we became really, really good at making that and controlling and enabling and creating interesting affordances for behavior inside the piece and all of that, and creating great story, branching narratives, or great sandboxes, whatever choices you make. And then we realized that the pieces didn't always work. You make the perfect piece and it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is that you're asking impossible things of the participants. You're asking them to read your mind about what kind of thing they were coming to. You're asking them to perhaps memorize enormous amounts of material, because you have created a very detailed fiction that they now have to memorize to be able to engage with the play, or so and so on. Here, video games are a lot better. A video game will always include a tutorial. Video game players do not automatically assume that they know how to play the video game. They assume that the first thing that happens is the video game will teach them how to do it. And I think a lot of that thinking has helped us a lot. Say, okay, if historically we used to just like send emails with instructions, and that's where immersive theater is also now, like, here is a PDF of 5 pages that you need to read before entering the piece. And people may or may not read it. It's also a problem. So what we do typically is we gather everybody on site, and then whether for 10 minutes or for 2 days, you have some kind of what we call workshops, some kind of briefings and exercises where you basically take people through the process of knowing everything they need to know to engage with the piece. And that could be like, how do the interaction mechanics work? What are the hard behavior limits? What are the safety regulations? All of that stuff. But also it could be things about the fiction. And of course, that's a place where you can co-create a lot of the content as well. Because that gives the participants a lot of buy-in into things. If you have designed very carefully what the purpose of, like, there are 3 cultures in this piece and they have these values and the purpose of their actions are these, but it doesn't matter necessarily what the surface detail of the actions in their cultures are. So maybe you let the participant decide, like, how do we greet each other in this culture, and then they get to make that together, for instance. And a lot of those exercises, as in any kind of elegant design, the more things you can solve at the same time, the more elegant it is, because the hardest currency in any kind of experience design, I think, is time with your participants on site. So you want to be as efficient as possible. And whatever you do, even like sometimes we'll like tell them to carry these chairs, now for the next exercise, we will need to do something. And it's not like I could create a process where I have like staff carrying chairs, but actually if the participants solve a physical problem together very rapidly, they will feel a sense of achievement, and it becomes like subconscious team building, or whatever. It could be things like that. And so, or you can do hacks, like we're going to do a hugging exercise because later there's going to be physical intimacy in the piece. But also I know biologically that when people do very extended physical contact, they start to trust each other more. And you can tell people when you introduce an exercise like that, what the reason is. And you can say, like, like, we're going to do an exercise now where we're going to pair up randomly and hug each other, and it's going to be uncomfortably long. It's going to feel awkward, then it's going to feel a little bit weird, then it's going to feel super nice, then it's going to feel weird again. And you just continue until I say stop. If you can tap out at any time, and if you don't want to do this, because again, some people with some diagnoses can't, it's also always acceptable to just opt out and stand by the wall. And then people do this, and then they're going to go through all the emotions you told them, and then they feel a sense of achievement for having been awkward at the right time. That's the kind of reframing, saying, okay, you're gonna have a feeling now, and it's not necessarily comfortable, but it's going to feel normal, and it's going to help you later in the piece. And the debrief is almost about doing the same thing in reverse. I think that for me, that you say at the beginning, well, it depends so much on the piece, but it's quite important in the beginning to say that when you go through an experience of this kind, you can have almost any kind of emotional reaction, and whatever reaction you have is normal and acceptable. You don't have to enjoy this. If you don't enjoy it, you don't have to say at the end that you enjoyed it, because there's often this sort of social pressure if somebody had a great time, that you don't want to rain on their parade by being critical. But it's also nice to have a process where if somebody did have a strong reaction to something, that they always have the opportunity of speaking to you separately, so that they don't have to deal with their reaction in front of everybody, for instance. That's quite important as well.
Yeah, I made like 3 little notes for myself. I put them in a little square so they look like plaques. This is not important for us, but it's important for me. But
you want to show them to us? You can show them to us.
Yeah. They're over here.
Yes. Yes.
We'll put them on the fridge after the webinar. So it was kind of 3 points that I was thinking about bringing up. Well, Johanna was talking, like 3 common, maybe not, I wouldn't say mistakes, because I would not put a judgment on it, but 3 perspectives I find interesting to be tackled or to be aware of. Send us pics afterwards. It's been a time since I got that message. Yeah. So one of them is yeah, I think the tutorial and the workshop is essential also, not just because in any play situation, but in anything that you are introducing a social frame that it's with outside a conventional setting. Yeah. Again, the reason why we don't have a tutorial to go to theater, because we've been tutorialed usually since from the first moment that we ever go to theater as kids, or I don't know at what point as teenagers. So we also have then a reinforced competence of our parents who take us, or the others, or the teachers who take us. So we have already pre-established frames how to condition ourselves into certain situations, how to behave in a playground, how to behave in a classroom, how to behave in an art gallery, in a mall, whatever. So the purpose of the workshop is actually, I think there's the beauty of the debrief and the workshop, that it's a humble admission that we are doing here something else right now. And again, that's a transparency towards yourselves also as makers, that we are going to do now something different. So for all of us, we need to kind of start from a tabula rasa. And that happens if all of us are starting from the level of consenting adults. Again, I think a lot of times, I don't know if we ever is going to talk about manipulation, but here maybe I'm going to kind of touch upon it. Maybe this is the right time to kind of touch upon it. But no, I don't think manipulation is necessarily bad. I think consensuality and transparency related to manipulation is key. One of my first experiences with Nordic LARP was I played a short LARP called Wilt, which is by Karete Jakobsen and maybe Magnus, 2 lovely Norwegians, and it's a game in which you go through it for about 5 hours in a pair. So you're paired up with someone, and you go through certain cycles of breakup, and this kind of 5 stages of grief during breakup, and you're guided through it. And in the preliminary workshop, the first thing that they said, that for the sake of the experience, the facilitators were telling to the players that for the sake of the experience, we are going to manipulate you into certain stages. And everything in me went like, like, you're gonna do what? But then I think the boldness and the transparency of that, we are going to do this because we want you to have an experience. And this is how we are going to do it from A to Z. which again opens it up. And I think this is very essential to, again, what are you putting forward to your players, and try to be as aware as possible. What are you putting towards to your players, both for yourself and then for them. Also, if they have any questions, then you know how to answer it, because questions will happen. So this is one of the things. The other thing I was thinking of is what I found as a common kind of thread that impairs sometimes participatory design is that there's a lot of focus often on like surface design or of narrative design of an experience, and not on the experience, on the participation design. What I mean by that is that a game designer or an artist or a writer or someone who's very interested in a story or the fiction crafts the fiction extremely well, so much so often that it's even impossible for the players to recognize or to memorize all of it. But this is not even the important part. But the important part is that I guess there's so much focus on that, and that the actual human physical interaction and accessibility falls behind. And I think it has to always be the other way around. It doesn't matter if the tribe Schmalgeborg wears black or green. I mean, it does matter in the realm of the fiction, but you need to have like active players in order to kind of do that. And that also comes from,
Yeah, but I mean, you often also you make the choice because it's really difficult for people to, like, normally we would know who are the members of which tribe. So you may decide that this tribe wears black and that one wears green, as actually it's a visual aid, so that people will know who belongs to which group, so they can pretend that they've known each other their whole lives, for instance. And then suddenly it has a function, like it matters to the design quite a lot that you're able to show up with green or black clothes or whatever. It's a really smart thing to, for instance, have some green and black clothes available, because some people are still going to mess this up, or their luggage disappears or something like that.
Yeah, no, I very much agree with you, and I think it comes from the perspective of like, we don't like thinking through an experience design's perspective is still not as common in participatory experiences, and we still think through kind of narrative design or from surface design parts, which is a radically different. It's a from a top to bottom design, whereas we should go from up. And I think with the debrief, what's interesting, I adore the debrief. It's my favorite part of any experience. And I don't necessarily think it needs to happen afterwards. It's basically a part of, you're just, debrief, for me, debrief is basically something that we take a little bit of critical distance from whatever we're experiencing in order to consciously voice it, vocalize it, and process it. And that within the classic Nordic LARP structure, that happens after the experience, I would say in a 4-hour LARP. At least with like a shorter, like a black box or chamber LARP, it happens after.
But in a multi-day piece, you might have an act break, or like just break to sleep out of character. Like you build, or you even build in lulls. You build in slower periods of time to allow the players, without breaking the fiction, to reflect even. Yeah, this is what we do a lot when I work with kids a lot, and one of the things that we do is that we run a 3-week children's camp in Hungary where we role play 24/7 for 3 weeks. Which means Lord of the Flies if you don't debrief. But we found that, and this is something that in general, I think, be that your experience 3 weeks or 20 minutes, what I saw often that designers or facilitators are very afraid to do is to go into debrief mid-experience, thinking that it will somehow break the magic. So if we stop for a second and negotiate our things, it somehow will spoil the experience. Of course, the converse of it is true. Within that reflection, we actually become more empowered, more reflexive. We can voice our autonomy and actually can go deeper into the experience. So this
for the
is
kids,
so important. Because there's a fallacy. Because the game, the brain edits a non-stop narrative after the fact. So we believe that we haven't been taking breaks. Now, I think if you've been to a long experience and you don't remember having been to the bathroom as like important plot points in your narrative, that's a clue that your brain will also not remember negotiating the rules, for instance. But because we remember them as these like continuous flows, we think that we didn't take breaks. We always take breaks. And I put on my contacts in the morning and I text the babysitter or whatever. Like there are all kinds of things that people do, and that don't ruin the experience. So of course it's not going to ruin the experience to build in some, especially for safety and consent, which is actually going to allow you to do better. For some of our pieces, for instance, this sort of occult personal horror LARP called Baphomet, which is about a cult. where everybody sort of dies at the end or whatever, and it's like 3 days of madness. We used to run it without those clear breaks, but now we put in a calibration break that's literally like 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the middle of this piece. Everybody just gathers and then we talk about what's working for people, what's not working, and so on. It's so good. And now we've started to actually recommend that to people, because again, the brain will not remember that as anything. It's good to check in with, like, it's also good. One of the big purposes, especially if you're playing fictional characters, right, and or being in a very competitive situation, that's what you want to hang out before and after, just so that people can have some relationships out of the competitive situation or outside of the fictional situation. You want the before, so that afterwards they can return to that from before with the new depth and the new trust that they've made. Can I say something about or build a little bit on what you just said as well? Because I think a lot of, in our consulting work, we end up dealing with museums or theaters, for instance, that are very interested in new audiences. And it's, because of the horrors of the world, what new audiences often they mean people who are poorer or browner than themselves, or younger. For a lot of our traditional arts institutions, like, we want young audiences, new audiences, like code. It means we want people who are currently not having access to this high culture thing to come and use our thing. Then they succeed if they're good at getting people there. Then they get really upset because people do it wrong. People behave wrong. People don't know these codes. And I thought about it when you were talking about how we're socialized into knowing how to behave at a theater. Yeah, like, a lot of people are, but a lot of people are not. And those people don't necessarily even feel welcome. But if you manage to pull them into the theater, you typically put them in a situation where they are insecure or even humiliated or punished even for their behavior, for trying to enjoy the thing that you made for them. And this is so hard, and especially with immersive theater, I get so mad at the people when they're bitching about how their participants are doing the wrong thing. Like, no, if the participants are breaking explicit rules, sure, like, then they're not following the social contract. That's a different kind of thing. But if they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing, that is not the participant's fault. Then you are not doing your job. Like, if people don't understand how to play your game, it's not the people's fault. It is your fault. Somewhere in participant selection, or probably in the design, communicating the design, you have failed. And I made a note that says, usually your fault. If not your fault, still your responsibility, and definitely it's still going to be your problem. And this is so important. And it means that then people are like, oh, but do I have to, like, predict what every misunderstanding that people can have? Yes. Yeah, sorry, like, yes. And you can't predict all of them, so you have to have a procedure for, like, reconnecting people when they do something wrong. Yeah. I'm looking a little bit at the time.
Yeah.
So I want to say something about consent, but do you want to respond first?
I think two tiny things that came from the top of my head. There's also a question from Anders, like mid debrief, for example, after workshop or before play. Yeah, food breaks is one of the things that we do often, like when we run the camp for children. Breakfast is usually the reflection time, but we all, as a collective reflection, and we do tiny reflections between kids throughout the day. We catch them, at least one of them every day, and do a tiny coaching session with them. How are you? And I think the last thing that Johanna said, I think I can't underline that and do this enough, and plus one it enough. I think there's a lot to learn from the sentence when someone says they are not playing my game right. I think that's where one of the key shifts needs to happen. I think in mindset. So who owns an experience, or can you actually claim ownership on an experience or not? Yes, time.
Yes, so consent, I just want to say this. When we've been talking about consent in this context, often we talk about it as though it's one thing. And I've found in the last year that it's not helpful. People get confused. So I just want to introduce and there are more distinctions, but this is the most important, between story consent and physical consent. And I think that story consent is if you're making narrative experience design, but actually it could also be about themes. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be about story, but physical consent is about, am I in control of, and I think I should always be in control of, like, who touches my body, what does my body do, and what is done to my body, like what is the physical situation in which I am I able to live. And for all kinds of safety reasons, it's very important, generally speaking, that people are always physically able to live. So you have to have a lot of extra safety mechanisms in place if you're going to, for instance, physically restrain people, even for a small while. So I generally, I would, unless you're very expert in these things, I would definitely advise against that. But story consent is often where we are struggling, and where a lot of the difficulty in design happens. And that's about thinking about, like, what kinds of themes, what kinds of situations will I be exposed to? Like, what kinds of themes will happen around me? What kinds of actions will other people be doing that I might become witness to in the context of this fictional or competitive, for instance, if it's a game situation. And sometimes in very mechanical game design systems, those two are so intimately connected. If a lot of your story interactions are happening through mechanical game design actions, like you're spending points on actions, for instance, they're very difficult to separate. But if in the types of games that we do, you can separate those. So you can say, I, the player, am now not gonna do this thing, but my character, like inside the fiction, this situation is going to continue, but I, the player, will not physically embody the situation. We're not going to do this thing. And that can be resolved in many different ways. But very often we can also say, no, you know what? We trust you guys to say that we're just not going to take this in this direction. And then if it's a very competitive situation, then the participants don't tend to trust each other to not use it to cheat, quote unquote, for their character to get away from negative consequences inside the fiction. And that's when separating it from the physical consent can be useful. But generally, I think people can tell interesting stories about anything. So trusting people to say, okay, you know what, I can't go engage in this direction, or like, wow, like this, there was suddenly a lot of shouting in this room, and I realized that I don't want this story to become about that kind of conflict. That you build in a mechanism where you can negotiate a little bit about nudging the discussion in another, or just breaking it hard and saying, you know what, I can't engage with this if it goes in. So how do we resolve it? How would you like to play this so that it becomes fun for everybody again, or meaningful for everybody again? And enabling that, I think, is super important. And that's also why it's a little bit difficult to work with, like, surprises and uncertainty as core aesthetics in these kinds of pieces, where you need people to be able to also challenge themselves safely. And then when you build all of these safety nets around where people have the choice and they feel that they're not going to be forced, then they will always use that safety net to push themselves farther and to challenge themselves and to go very close to the things that are scary to them. Whereas if they don't know whether you're going to push them, then they have to back away and not engage with it at all. So my experience is that if you have good safety, people do become braver, generally speaking.
Yeah, I think in terms of how, again, I think it boils down a lot to like know what is the degree of things that can change within the game. Or game, or the play experience, or in anything. So what is, what are kind of the fundamental things and functions that will not change, and what are the things that the fiction and the narrative and how the story unfolds and how the kind of interaction unfolds can change within that, right? So in a classical, I don't know, movie theater setting, there's a lot of twists and turns on the screen, but you're still, like they become from space monkeys to cowboys in one shot, but you're still in the chair. You're not challenged to do anything. And I think a lot of problems come from when you come somewhere expecting a certain kind of interaction and that is transgressed, right? I mean, it's often said that, okay, now I'm breaking the fourth wall, or the actor comes down and breaks the fourth wall, or something happens. But I do think that actually the fourth wall is not broken; it's just kind of pushed into.
But if people understand the frame, it's safer. But at the same time, they will also make better story choices together. So it's a win for you as well. Like nobody loses if you understand the frame.
Yeah, their favorite story is always going to be their own.
Yeah.
It's. I have one question here from Lydia. Can you describe shortly children's play camp, Aron? Shortly. I'm gonna. Okay, I'll give myself 1.5 minutes to do this. It's basically okay. I'm losing time.
I know you will not make it in 1.5 minutes. I suggest that we put it on the platform. If you would be willing to write very shortly. About what it is.
I'll send the link. I'll send the link of the little publication that I wrote.
Exactly, perfect. We have exactly 60 seconds. If both of you can give one example of a game or an experience that you took part in and you found incredibly well designed in terms of safety and consent as a takeaway, then that would be amazing, and then we can beat firewalls.
I am drawing a blank, which is terrible because I've probably I'm not participating in so many, so it's very difficult to bring one out. You go first, Aron.
I'm gonna go with the easy one. Anything from Nina, Runa, Essendrop.
Essendrop, yes.
I'm just gonna send the link over there. Danish lab designer. I'm sending it because it's a unique combination of high artistic value, very good game and interaction design, and actually very good participatory and consent design, and extremely well guided. So
and she makes a lot of her pieces are also nonverbal, which makes it very clear on a sort of design level if you want to learn about this form. And the workshops are always integrated naturally into a piece, into the piece. So the work being in the workshop, you're already in the piece. I think that's always true, but it becomes very clear in her work. I think that's a really good example. Yeah. Nina Runa Essendrop. She's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I hear the bell ringing on the tower, so we have to stop now. Thanks for participation and for wonderful discussion, as expected.
So much.
Yeah, and hope to meet you in person someday. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Bye bye, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Ciao.